Hello and welcome to another lesson with Global News Alliance Academy. I'm your host, Sam Ebersole, Director of Training for GNA. And today we're going to talk about tips to becoming a professional journalist. But you may have seen the earlier episode, which were tips for beginners. We're going to take it up a notch and we're going to address some tips for folks who maybe have been a journalist for a short time or maybe even a long time. So with me today is a good friend, longtime journalist and educator, Dr. Michael Ray Smith. Thank you, Michael, for being with
My
us
pleasure.
today.
Thank you.
We're just so honored to have people of the caliber of people like Professor Smith. Just to let you know a little bit about his background, Professor Smith earned a doctorate from Regent University. He has 2 master's degrees, one of them from Penn State University, Bachelor of Arts from University of Maryland. He's taught in various state and private universities in the States and in other parts of the world at both the undergraduate and the graduate level. He served as a professor of journalism, professor of communication studies, and one of his recent gigs was with LCC International University in Lithuania. And in addition to being a fantastic educator, Dr. Smith is an award-winning journalist and photographer. He's been quoted in more news outlets than I can name, but I'm going to just start with New York Times, Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, Christian Science Monitor, USA Today, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's been a guest on radio and TV shows, not just GNA Academy, but places like French TV 24 and other broadcast outlets. He's written 9 books, multiple peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and he's written hundreds of articles for the popular press. By the way, in terms of his books, you can go to Amazon and just search for Michael Ray Smith, and you will find at least 3 of his books are there on Amazon. And he also continues to write for an organization called Religion Unplugged. So thank you, Michael, for making time to be with us today. We're just so excited to have you talk to us and to our journalists who, again, may have a few months or few years or even a few decades under their belt already, but they want to take it up a notch. So you've got several tips for us. Why don't you jump right in and tell us what we're going to talk about today?
Well, thanks again, Sam, and greetings, Global News Alliance audience. Last time Sam and I talked, by the way, Dr. Sam Ebersole and I talked, we talked about the benefit of reading widely and how you can find somebody that you admire. You like the pacing of their prose or rhythm of the way they write, and to model your work on that person. You could do it in broadcasting too. It's a tried and true approach is to find a person or a person who is doing what you want to do and see how he or she does it. So you don't actually even have to take a course. All you do is read it or watch it, take some notes, notice how that person speaks or how the prose flows. Matter of fact, I would suggest doing what Ben Franklin did. If he found something that he liked, he would take that and literally write it word for word. Then he would put it aside and get a couple of prompts, maybe the first sentence of the first paragraph, the second, the first sentence of the second paragraph, and on and on. And then using his memory, he tried to fill it in as best he could. Third time, he would do it all from memory to see how much he could match that person's prose. A lot of work. It's a lot of work. But then again, everything that's worth doing something is a lot of work. And I guarantee you, your writing will improve. If you're a broadcaster, if you have a cassette recorder, does anyone still have them? Or you have a smartphone, you record yourself, you listen to it, maybe have somebody that you trust listen to it and say, what is the problem here? And is it enunciation? The ancients literally would put stones or pebbles more like in their mouth
Mhm.
and then speak until they got to the place where they could be understood. They spit out those pebbles and they do it again, and it would be a little better. So these are just ways for you to grow as a broadcaster or as a writer, modeling your work on somebody you like. That was one of the things we talked about, and we said to read widely, to find people that you admire. I picked this book off my shelf. It's by Amanda Sturgill, Elon University, Detecting Deception. And I mentioned in an earlier G&A broadcast the benefit of a book like this, the AP style book, that's just full of uh, quick, concise ways to talk about whatever it is you're writing about, whether it's an elected official, a clergy person, and how you refer to that clergy person in an appropriate way so he or she is not unduly offended. And here's what I've found. Go ahead.
By by the way, Michael, is there an equivalent of AP style book in other regions? Like, does the
Yeah.
BBC have an equivalent
Yeah.
publication
So
or yeah?
every major news organization, New York Times has its own style guide, we call it. BBC, same.
Okay.
Reuters, same. Our friends in South America, whatever the leading publication is, they have theirs. I don't know if you can actually get a copy, but if you could, boy, that would be a benefit,
Mhm.
wouldn't it? Particularly if you want to write for Reuters. But that's not going to make or break you. What typically we call it an editor, person that will be talking to you before you even write that first word or broadcast that first episode. Uh, they want to know a couple of things. One, are you a person that checks things out? So when you write or broadcast, you're thinking through the different approaches that we use in whether it's broadcasting or print. And I think this is still a deal that we use in all of our work across the world. And that is, are you getting anything out of this? Are you basically being detached and you're providing a report because you just want to provide a report? So you're not, as we would say, on the take. You're just basically doing the
Mhm.
thing you're called to do. So read widely is a topic we talked about in an earlier episode. Then we went on to say the difference between fact and opinion, and how can you tell what's a fact and what's opinion? And one quick way is, can you verify it? Can you go to a second source or a third source and find the same thing? Or better yet,
Mhm.
if you're doing a broadcast or you're doing a print piece, why not go to the original source and talk to that person? Now, that may be difficult if it's a high profile person. Let's say there's an evangelist that comes to town and he or she wants you to be part of, we call it the press pool. And you're just a new reporter, you don't have credentials, but you want to talk to the person. It's going to be harder to do that. But as best as possible, get first class information. And that it is tricky. It's hard to get that, but verify your information so that you're not going to be guilty of repeating something that maybe is somebody's opinion and it's not factual. So we talked about that in an earlier program. Read widely and know the difference between fact and opinion. Here's a new tip: sell it first and then write it. And what this means is you have a passion as a writer, whether it's broadcast or print or audio, just a radio report. And you think, I'm going to go ahead and do this piece, and you don't know who's going to use it. That it may work out. It may work out. It may be that it's so powerful that anybody would want it broadcasted or printed. Better yet, though, call the editor at a publication and say, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? So and so is coming to town next week, and I think I can get some FaceTime with him or her. I'll get you photographs. By the way, that's really a way to enhance your paycheck if you can do two things: write the
Mhm.
piece, take the photos, and these days do some video. Do it all, and your publication will be very pleased. And you talk to this person, the gatekeeper, and say, "What do you think of this idea?" And gatekeeper will say, "I like the idea, but I don't want that. Here's the angle I want you to go." And
Mm.
typically, the angle has to do with something that's fashionable at the moment. And so you think about, okay, now I'm going to change my approach a little bit, and you prepare a series of questions in advance and do the interview, get some video, take the stills, then you go write the thing, send it to the editor. And maybe even before you write your first word, actually say to the editor, here's where I'm going with this. And they will give you feedback.
Let me give you an example of that. If you were a French Christian journalist and you lived anywhere near Paris, a couple of months ago, a year ago, however long ago, you know that the Olympics is coming to your city. You know that there are going to be athletes there who are giving
Yeah.
glory to God, who are believers, who are going to have a testimony if they medal, if they have a performance that attracts attention and they give glory to God, there's a story there for GNA, for instance. We wish we had had journalists on the ground in Paris last week for the Olympic Games. And if you were that person who might have been able to file that report and you had contacted us in advance and said, "Hey, I'd like to do a story about this particular athlete or that particular athlete," we would have been thrilled with that and would have almost assuredly given that a wide audience to our affiliate media companies who broadcast our content. So, um, like you said, sell your idea. So if you live in a part of the world where something is happening and you know it's going to happen, you might only have 24 hours notice. You might have days or weeks, but if you can run it by us, we can say yes. And like you said, we'll probably have suggestions on what angle to take to make that a compelling story that we're interested in covering.
Sell it first, then write it. Yeah, I agree. And that's a great example because there were testimonies, wonderful testimonies.
Yes. Yeah.
So sell it first
Yeah.
and write it. The next thing I would say, trying to talk to somebody that you would consider a big deal that came to town. We have people uh, in communities that come in, they jet in, they do their presentation, whether it's a banquet or probably selling something like a book. And you talk to that person and you can keep in mind, and we call it multimedia journalism. You write the print story, you take the photos, you do the video, and maybe even prepare an audio story. And GNA and others will help you figure out how to do that. But when these people come to town uh, ahead of time, you make some kind of overtures to the people that are hosting the big deal and say, I would like to come and talk to the person. And sometimes it works out that they will give you FaceTime with the person before or after. Sometimes there's at a banquet, there's a question and answer period, and you can be the first person to ask a question or a series of questions. And there's always like a 6-second delay before people will throw their hand up. I don't wait. When they say, does anybody have a question? I'm out of my seat and I'm standing up there. I do it as professionally as I can. I say my name and the organization with which I'm associated, and I ask the question. Now, if they don't do that, I sit in the front row or as close as I can get. And when the speaker starts to walk off the dais and down a couple of steps, or out the back door, I'm out like a shot and I'm following the person. And I just do the same thing. Hi, I'm so and so, and I'm with such and such. May I walk with you and ask you a couple of questions? I've never had anybody say, "Don't get lost."
Mhm.
Uh, Again, when they do something like that, it's usually to prevent people from unduly being a bother. If you try to set it up ahead of time and ask these questions. Now, if you're going to do that, talk to somebody at GNA or some other organization. Say, hey, this guy is coming, this woman is coming. I'd like to do the interview. Are you interested? So ahead of time, try to interview people. Try to make the arrangements to interview the person who is considered a big deal, whether it's a writer or a pastor, or sometimes we have these people that want to tell their stories about how they were in a Turkish prison and they were facing perhaps execution for sharing the gospel, or they're typically accused of being a spy, and somehow they were miraculously released. And that actually happened a few years ago under a president named Trump, who got one of our missionaries released. So those are important stories.
It's probably worth mentioning, Michael, that if it's a big enough name, if it's a head of state or maybe a leader in the church or what have you, they may have a
Hmm.
pool reporter. So you may show up at an event, but there's one person or one organization that is allowed to have access and do an interview, and then that has to be shared with all other legitimate news organizations. So you don't get to customize or ask your specific question, but you get legitimate news making quotes, and maybe you can build your story around that. But you would have to have some credentials, obviously, to be able to be a recipient of a pool report. And pool, I'm using the word POOL. So instead of a large group of reporters swarming the newsmaker, you have a person or one organization representing the entire pool of reporters with that person at that moment.
It's getting more and more common that
Mhm.
the newsmaker himself or herself will have a recording and make it available. You can get the
Yeah,
sound bite or the quote that you want. As an independent thinker, I'm not that crazy about that because I'm not sure how this thing's
right.
been sanitized.
They're trying to control the narrative. And you, as a good working journalist, want to unpack that
Well,
prepackaged
right, right.
soundbite.
So many organizations are looking for content. The trick is, how do you match the creator of the content with the people that want to deliver the content? And it's a bit of an art. My last tip: we have in the United States a group called ProfNet, and ProfNet has two portals. One for experts. Dr. Ebersole would be considered an expert, particularly in the field of mass media. So he would be eligible, and all he has to do is go on and create a login and a password, submit his credentials, and they'll put him on a page that if somebody's interested in say, inspirational broadcasting, he might be selected by a journalist or writer. The second one is for the writers, you and me, and we can go on, create a login and password, and submit our credentials. If they accept us, we now can submit a question for a group to answer. And you say, well, I'm not sure how that would help me. Well, let's just say you're writing about a particular inspirational press issue, such as ways to pray effectively. And you have a specific question about prayer, like, is it better to pray when you've fasted for 2 days? Is that prayer more effective? And it's a theological question. So you submit that question, and they send it to all the people on their list. So ProfNet will send out 100 queries, a day. Mostly they go to universities, and mostly they go to the public relations office at the university. And that poor person has to read 100 of these. But if she sees something or he sees something that's appropriate for somebody in their university, they will forward it to that person. And that person then will write you back and say, this is interesting to me, and here's my quote. And then you as the reporter can call that person, write that person, and do the interview. And you then suddenly have access to some of the greatest thinkers alive today. And I guarantee you, whoever you're writing for will that editor or that station manager will say, yeah, it's pretty good, you know. And keep it in mind, it may not be of interest to many of the GNA audience, but someone out there should consider it.
Awesome. And that last one, ProfNet, is kind of a speakers bureau for
Yes,
experts,
it can be.
particularly
It can
ones
be.
in the, yeah.
It's actually public. It's actually a website. If you put ProfNet in your browser, it'll come up. But it's a public relation. In this case, they're trying to help you get the information you're seeking. What do they get out of it? If it were Dr. Sam Ebersole, typically they would mention who is professor emeritus at Colorado University, State
State
University.
University
Yeah.
in Pueblo.
So, so the university gets a little, shout out.
Well, thank you, Michael. Great tips for our more advanced reporters. Thanks, those of you watching. We encourage you to tune into what we are putting out there as instructional content. We will continue to try to update the GNA Academy YouTube site. So if that's where you found us, we encourage you to subscribe to us on YouTube. Be sure to contact us if you have any questions or want to just become more involved with what GNA is doing, telling stories about what God is doing around the world. So thank you again, Michael. We appreciate you taking time. We also want to create a mentors network of professional working journalists who can be available to our younger reporters coming up. So I've been talking to Michael about that. We will continue to proceed with that. So again, if you want to receive more instruction, more training, more mentoring, we are here to try to connect you with those resources. So until next time, thanks so much and God bless you.